So, here we are then. Obviously this game's been requested quite a lot. That does tend to happen after you do a 7-part series entirely on the game that preceded it. People have wanted me to do Final Fantasy VIII ever since. And so finally, here we go. I've decided to give it to you. Now I should immediately say this off the bat, don't expect the same sort of thing as FF7. Final Fantasy VII is a game that I've played through multiple times for about 20 years. It's my favourite game of all time. There's not a lot I don't know about it, to be honest. Final Fantasy VIII, on the other hand, is a game that I only ever played up to, I guess, about halfway through Disc 1. I stopped because my copy of the game got stolen, and until now I've not touched it since. This is going to be more of a learning experience then. What you're seeing here is the first time I've played this game for nearly 20 years, finishing what I've started. Still, hopefully it should have some worth. And that's not to say we won't be going into any detail at all. FF8 has always had an interesting place in the Final Fantasy canon. I don't think there's any other game in the franchise that's more decisive than this one. It slowly seemed to gather more fans over time and people willing to write in praise of the game, but it is still definitely considered one of the lesser entries in the series. Around the start of the internet reviewing craze, its reputation was pretty frickin' low. One guy in particular, Spoony, back in his glory days, got a big part of his following through taking the game and bodying basically everything about it. 2 hours and 40 minutes of ripping the thing apart. Things are a little better for the game now, but only just. It just seems lesser compared to the games between it, the hulking behemoth that is 7, and the much loved Back to the Roots 9. Is this surprising? I'm not sure. Final Fantasy VIII's position was always going to be difficult because the series had changed so much. It started as Square's last shot, indeed their final game, which is what it would have been if the first Final Fantasy hadn't been a big hit in Japan, even getting an American release. But for 5 main games afterwards, the series largely stayed in Japan. 2 of the games came out in America and were loved by the audience, but it was a kind of niche one. Over here, we didn't even see Final Fantasy at all until 7, which changed everything. That was the series' introduction to the world, really. The 10+ million copies it sold speak for themselves, immediately proclaimed as one of gaming's greatest achievements. JRPGs went from something that half the time didn't leave their home country to the brand new hotness. In terms of sales, it's still the most popular entry in the series, and honestly, I doubt that's going to change. Its sequel then was put in an unenviable position, one that I don't think any other game in the series has been at before or since. Simply put, I can think of very few games where the expectations were so high in anticipation of the game's release. Metal Gear Solid 2, Grand Theft Auto 4, Half-Life 2 perhaps, not many more. In these cases, it's impossible to see how they could have gotten any higher. The previous game wasn't just a classic, it was a sales monster. In one way, it's good for the expectations to be so high. It certainly guarantees good sales, and that happened. Hell, it sold over 8.5 million, and until FF13 it was the fastest selling entry in the series. Really, that only changed because FF13 went multi-platform. However, it can be a bit troublesome for a series that is known for changing things up so much. Every Final Fantasy is set in its own universe, the storylines are often totally different, the way the games play vary a hell of a lot. Less thematic similarities, sure, but don't expect everything you loved about the previous game in the series to be in the next one. If you're a veteran of the series, you'll know this, but a lot of us only had 7 at the time. Which is why I think a fair few of us, having experienced the world crisis in the last instalment, might have been disappointed by the much smaller stories centering largely around 2 people, neither of whom are exactly regarded amongst the most endearing protagonists, not in the way that classic Cloud was. He and FF7's main guy, the gunblade-toting Squall Leonhardt, may both swing big swords, but they are kind of different. Nor is there really a Sephiroth equivalent, or even an Iris equivalent. Don't discount the importance of that. FF8's story isn't based on such shocking twists. Rinoa Heartily, Squall's main squeeze, is kind of a Tifa equivalent in the way that Squall is sort of a Cloud equivalent, but both will suffer in a direct comparison. Nor is this game all that dystopian either. It's got the sci-fi stuff, but it's different, more subtle. The game's box is a clue to the differences. In the old days, there always used to be a drawing with the game's name that hinted at the content within. FF7 features Lemetia, the thing that in-game is going to end the world. FF8 features Squall and Rinoa in an embrace, the first sign before you even load the game that this is going to be a different experience. So in respect of that, I'm not going to try and compare FF8 to FF7 that much unless there's clear similarities that are meant to hook you in, as that may well lead to its downfall. In respect of what the series tries to do with each instalment, I'm going to play the game on its own merits, as I think that's best. Later on, Square would certainly try to attract people into new games more with clear markers towards the past. Here, I think they were largely doing what they'd always done. Work on FF8 started while FF7 was still being localised into English after all. Also, we're playing the PC version, which isn't ideal, but my new PS1 copy turned out to be crap, which was nice. It's not a bad port nowadays, mind. The graphics are alright, and there's the Roses and Wine mod which brings the PlayStation music into the game and frankly should be considered essential if you're going to play FF8 on PC through Steam. Unless that is you would prefer the game's soundtrack to be rendered in Windows 98-tastic basic MIDI sound fonts. Anyway, let's get on to the game itself. It all starts with a big old opening video, a beach and the soothing sounds of Liberi Fatali. We see pretty much all four of the main people. There's Squall and Rinoa in the field, there's Adir, a sorceress who unsurprisingly is the game's main antagonist, but the main thing people remember is the big fight between Squall and his rival, Cypher Almazi, both toting their respective gunblades. This weapon being a particular source of hype. Now this is definitely a link between FF8 and FF7. The first game established that massive swords were a good thing, and FF8 ups the ante with another massive sword, only this time there's a gun attached to it. Holy shit! I imagine that the simple word gunblade was enough to guarantee many a purchase. It should be noted, mind you, that the gunblade is actually not a sword that fires bullets. It is in fact a gun with a trigger on it that when pressed sends vibrations through the sword as if a bullet had been fired through it. Cut someone with this when it's vibrating and presumably that's going to cause a lot more damage and go through easier. So basically, it's a vibro sword. I know, I was surprised to learn this too. Naturally, some people have either attempted to recreate the weapon in real life or given their thoughts on how feasible said weapon is, and most agree that even theoretically it's completely ridiculous. I mean, would you want to swing something that big around with a freaking crooked gun handle? But this is a JRPG, and such logic has no place here. Anyway, it turns out that the epic battle between Cypher and Squall, where the former tried to carve our hero's bloody head off, was just training, although Squall will be left with a big old scar on his face. Both are part of the Balaam Garden Academy and are training to be super elite soldiers, or Seed as the game calls them. A private army basically, ready for action at any time. And so here's another similarity between FF8 and FF7. Like the previous game, you'll be spending a lot of your time in the opening in one big old area. Unlike Midgar though, Balaam Garden is more like a base of operations. The world map, or at least the first continent, is open to you from the off, but you'll be coming back here quite a bit in the opening. Largely the first part of the game deals with Squall's training, and the first characters you come across, himself, Cypher, Quistis, their tutor, and Zell, who's another student. Generally things move at a slower pace in FF8 than they did in FF7, that's clear from the off. Of course, FF7 is an outlier. Few RPGs start with you going straight on a bombing mission where you blow up a freaking reactor, while FF8 does set up things more traditionally. Still, you should generally get used to less things happening. As far as the characters go, well, Squall is a man of few words. His main quote is usually an ellipsis and a whatever. He completely lacks social skills. As such, people generally don't like him, as in real people. His introduction is totally different to Cloud's total arrogance and bravado. He's more intriguing, usually dismissed as a typical whining bloody emo. But is there something more there? There are some strange touches early on. Quistis, his instructor, who in typical JRPG style is a prodigy and thus still a teenager herself, openly flirts with him most of the time, and Squall doesn't rebuff it as much as he just doesn't get it. The hints, which are not subtle, just pass him by. He usually says more in his inner monologue than he does to other people. An oddly passive character then, especially for a main hero. Some fan theories, and yes, this should really not be taken as canon, have posited the idea that Squall has Asperger's syndrome or is in some way autistic, although there's no evidence whatsoever for anything like that. Unsurprisingly, he doesn't get along well with Cypher, who is more of your typical Cloud-style ace, arrogant as hell, good and he knows it. Weirdly also the head of the Garden's disciplinary committee, even if he has no issue with trying to take another student's head off in training. Cypher is one of the fun bits of characterisation in FF8 as he does turn the Cloud characterisation on its head somewhat, showing how easy it is for a hero to be an arsehole instead. although obviously Cypher does lack Cloud's deep-rooted identity issues. The name could also be seen as an allusion to Sephiroth, although I think in many ways he's closer to FF7's protagonist than he is to its antagonist. Anywho, fins are pretty free and easy from the first little bit of tutorial, the Fire Cavern, until you get to the first seed exam. You're supposed to take your time and figure out the gameplay, and this is where you come across the real big differences and the rather odd things about the game's battle, magic and character building systems. The big differences? Well, materia is gone. In FF8, magic has been turned into some science called power magic, and it can be drawn out of enemies as standard. No little orbs of energy required. As such, magic acts like an item. You have a supply of spells, but when you use them all, they're gone until you get more. Basic spells such as Fire, Blizzard and Cure can be found all over the shop, but more advanced spells such as, say, Thundarga or Blizzarga, or Bolt Free and Ice Free if you're used to FF7's less traditional namings, are much harder to come by. If you get them, then you shouldn't use them willy-nilly. And so magic does not level up the way it did in FF7. There is no such thing as MP in FF8. You can cast as many instances of a spell as you want in a battle, and the only thing that limits you is how much of that spell you have. What levels up instead are your summons, or what this game calls Guardian Forces, or GFs. After the first dungeon, you'll already have 3 of them. When you summon a GF in battle, a second ATB timer starts, during which time the GF takes damage instead of you, and once that timer ends, a summon attack happens as normal. Like magic, as long as the GF's HP isn't 0 and they aren't knocked out, you can use them as much as you want in a battle. Outside of battles, the GF's health automatically regenerates as you move. Simple enough, but that's not even half of what GFs do. GFs level up and can be set to learn many abilities, from new commands that you can use in battle to stat increases to, most importantly of all, the refinement ability, which we'll get into shortly. This all blends into the game's big mechanic, Junctioning. You can junction GF abilities and magic to your stats, which is the real way that you create a strong character. FF8 still has traditional leveling up a la FF7, but it's very different here. In FF8, most of the game's enemies and bosses level up with you, and so traditional grinding for levels can make something of a wad for your own back. You do need to level up in order to better access the really strong magics, items and so on, but because of this, enemies will be very strong at the higher levels. Correct usage of Junctioning is how you always stay ahead of them. So yeah, that is basically FF8's system. It is kind of varied and tough to get used to, which I do think in many ways contributed to a few complaints about FF8's gameplay. You see, in FF8 there is this command called Draw that you use to take magic spells away from monsters during battle and add them to your supply. In the opening tutorials, the game kind of conditions you into thinking that drawing is going to be really important and the main way that you get magic in the game. This can go several ways, one way in particular being that you could think, well shit, I don't want to run out of spells, and the more of a spell I have, the stronger a stat is when I junction the spell to it. So I best get out in the field and draw 100 cures, 100 fires, 100 scans, 100 blizzards. Needless to say, drawing spells all the time in battle soon gets very tedious. You get a random number between 0 and 9 each time, and it makes everything feel like a grind. This, however, is wrong. What you actually need to focus on is levelling up those GFs, and in particular getting them to learn their refinements. Refinements allow the GFs to draw magic from regular items, and this is how you really increase your supply of magic. For basic spells like Cure and Blizzard, you refine M-stone pieces, which are everywhere, into your magic supplies using the appropriate GF, getting a fixed amount every time. You should use drawing just to top up, either on the odd occasion in battle or from the many draw points dotted around the world. You can also use draw to get the odd GF sometimes. You should never spend ages grinding out 100 spells using draw. Not only is it unfun, it's thoroughly inefficient. And drawing just to cast a spell? Totally pointless. Drawing is nothing compared to refining. That's the mechanics anyway. How does this work in practice? Well, in short, Guardian Forces totally break the game. In fact, they're just one of the many ways in which this game can be broken. We'll get to others, believe me. If you know what you're doing and research just a little, as I did, you can break the game immediately. Here's the first big example. A little beach just outside Balaam Garden where you can fight these little fishies, the Fastita:(F as they're known. They're kinda strong and just attacking them isn't recommended, but Guardian Forces? They'll handle them no problem. 2 summons and they're basically dead, especially if you're using Quetzalcoatl as they're weak to lightning. If the GFs get a bit weary, well, just move away from the beach for a bit. 1 battle nets you 6 ability points, which is how the GFs level, and 6 AP is a lot, especially now. Doing this, you can easily learn the refinements for your 3 current GFs, as well as the all-important card command, which we'll get to. It won't even take an hour. And that's not all. These little fish drop fish fins, one of which can be refined into 20 water spells. Water is an incredibly powerful spell for the start of your game, and junctioning it to Squall's attack really boosts his damage. This should condition you into something else. Are you better off using any of those 100 water spells, or just using them as a junction? Well, they're much better as a junction. You're going to be doing much more damage on the whole with your basic attack than with a water spell. Indeed, using the spells will decrease the power of your attack. Magic is obviously essential in the junctioning system, but as something you use in combat, not so much. So how does all of this feel? Well, the thing about FF8's system is that there's 2 extremes to it depending on how you play: grindy and tedious, and utterly broken. There's not really a middle ground. A little work at the start and you're basically going to be good for a long time. Hell, you pretty much have to work to not break the game at some points. If you like to break JRPGs over your knee, and I kind of do, well, you've sure come to the right place. If you would actually like something of a challenge, you're going to have to purposefully control yourself a little, but you should at least do some of these things so you don't have to always be bloody drawing. Breaking the game is kind of easy though. I sort of miss how you really had to earn those breaks back in FF7, like when you figured out how to beat the Midgar Zolom the first time you encountered him and learned beta a whole disc before you were supposed to. I've only scratched the surface of just how much the game can be broken so early on. As we get into Triple Triad, you'll see how the game can be broken even more. We'll go back to actual story for now, but for the time being let's just say that FF8 is very, very easy. FF7 was easy too, but FF8 makes it look like a wizardry game by comparison. So, the Seed exam. First though we get introduced to Zeldinkt. Picture a JRPG character modelled after, I don't know, Mike Dirnt from Green Day, with a face tattoo. That's Zell. He's annoying, I don't like him, that's about it. In terms of typical FF characters, he's the hothead. Lots of flash, quick to get angry, not even half as fun in Lowell as Barrett is. Squall is, as usual, a man of few words. And then there's Cypher, who's going to be our captain on the mission. As ever, he's arrogant and looking for fun. One thing I like though about the dialogue is the subtle hints that this is not Cypher's first field exam. In fact, it's far from it. You only need to do the exam once to become a member of Seed. So for all his arrogance and his presentation as the best, Cypher's never actually passed this exam. Ergo, every other time he's been on it, he flunked it. It's a cool foreshadowing. Oh, and we also meet Balaam Garden's headmaster. His name is Sid. Sid Kramer, in fact. Now, in case you don't know, almost every Final Fantasy game has one character called Sid, the most famous obviously being ass-kicking, Venus Gospel murdering, drink your goddamn tea, chain-smoking swear hero Sid Highwind from FF7. The main series to date has featured 2 playable character Sids, 11 NPC Sids, and 1 antagonist Sid. The only game to not feature a Sid is the original NES title, although remakes have retconned Sid into that too. Hironobu Sakaguchi has said that there is no special meaning or direct reference behind Sid, but that he's generally supposed to be a wise character in the games. Sakaguchi compares him to Yoda. Anyway, we're off to the dukedom, whatever, of Dolet, because troops from Galbadia have invaded. We'll explain more about these places as we go, but Dolet kinda has the feel of an old mainland European town, which perhaps explains the dukedom bit. Not much of a mission, to be honest. Beat up a bunch of grunts mainly. After doing this for a bit, Cypher gets pissed off with being told to wait around and goes off towards a tower that the Galbadians are running to, thus breaking the mission orders entirely. I think we can see why this isn't Cypher's first rodeo. He's a loose cannon McGarnacle. At the top of the tower, we run into 2 other series mainstays, Biggs and Wedge. These 2 appear in most FF games as somewhat incompetent comic relief, and are a direct reference to Luke Skywalker's Rin Men in Star Wars when he blows up the Death Star. Much like Biggs in Star Wars, they often end up dead. In this instance, Biggs successfully gets this abandoned communication tower going before we slam the hell out of both of them in the boss battle. They then also get slammed by the real boss, Elveray, who we draw our 4th GF, Siren, from before slamming that too. One little similarity I dig is that much like Biggs and Wedge in FF7, their FF8 namesakes also come a cropper on top of a big tower. Mind you, we will be seeing them again. Oh, and I almost forgot. We've been introduced to another playable character. Selphie Tilmit is young and clumsy. You first meet her right in the beginning of the game when you can show her around Balam Garden, but she gets her proper introduction here through falling off a little cliff. She's okay, somewhat comparable to Yuffie. Also of note is that Selphie's weapons of choice are nunchakus. That's very clear. In the original PAL version of the game, this was changed to something called a shinobu. Why? Well, nunchucks are classed as a prohibited weapon or banned outright in several European countries, but the reason they were often edited out of TV shows, films or games in the UK is all down to this one guy, James Furman, former secretary of the BBFC. He once read an article in Time Out magazine about the wide availability of things like nunchucks and flying stars, or shuriken, and from then on references to illegal weapons in media became something of a pet hate of his. I mean, unless they were guns, obviously. And so almost any sequence in a film or TV show involving nunchucks and the like was removed from anything classified in the UK. Cuts to martial arts films like Enter the Dragon, Michelangelo, Panther or Thundercats, Leelon having a three-pointed staff instead of his nunchucks in Soul Blade. They all suffered thanks to him. James Furman retired in 1999 and the rules on nunchucks relaxed immediately. The version of the game that I'm playing on Steam calls Selphie's nunchucks exactly what they are, and I presume that was the case when this PC port was originally released in 2000. Anyway, as I often do, I digress. We now have 30 minutes to get back to the dropship, but on the way we're thwarted by this huge robot called XATM-092. The way this is supposed to work is that you beat him just enough to stop him, and then you try to evade him the rest of the way. However, as mentioned, Squall is a beast, and is even more of one now. And so on the third time of asking, I just blew the guy up. I'll explain more when we get back to gameplay. Eventually we make it back with loads of time to spare, and get back to Balam for the results. And it's not good news for Cypher. As a result of disobeying a direct order, not only will he not be joining Seed, he's going to be disciplined. But Squall, Zell and Selphie have all made the grade, and are now officially part of Balam Garden's mercenary group. Hooray for them. We get to the graduation party where Squall contents himself with booze and blowing off Zell, which makes me like him, until finally a girl cajoles him into a thoroughly awkward pas de deux on the dance floor. In case you haven't gotten it yet, Squall is not good around people. Outside he has a somehow even more awkward conversation with Quistis. One thing you might not be getting is all the long pauses between the text boxes, just to emphasise how stilted everything's supposed to be. It's like a bloody Harold Pinter play, and I dig that a lot. And my goodness, it gets worse when Quistis invites Squall to the secret area inside the training centre. Now we know that Quistis likes Squall a lot, not only as a student but as a person too. Things haven't gone well for her either. She's no longer an instructor and is now just a regular member of Seed. It's not spelt out, but it's implied that she failed as an instructor due to being unable to control her group, as in what Cypher did. Quistis pours her heart out to Squall, who utterly blows her off, acts like a total shithead, says all the things you shouldn't say. Again, what's not spelt out is that a part of Squall does want to be open to Quistis' problems, but something else is clearly rejecting it. There's a barrier stopping him from getting close to people. Lots of people don't like Squall, and after this scene I got that. This is still the getting to know phase, and first impressions of Squall are purposefully not good. He's not presented as cool, that's kind of Cypher's job. In fact, he's actively dislikable, and in keeping with the character, that's the side we're seeing of him right now. He's not exactly people's favourite FF protagonist, and this is a big reason why, but I don't think you're supposed to like Squall right now, which is kind of interesting. Perhaps things will change. Quistis hasn't quite lost hope. The girl who Squall saw when he was resting up also makes an appearance, and we save her from another monster who gets the overkill treatment. For now though, her and the girl we danced with are still basically a mystery. And so finally Squall gets to have a rest. Good thing too, because the first Seed mission starts tomorrow. For now though, you might have noticed just how ridiculous the damage I'm doing with Squall is at the moment, and obviously that does warrant an explanation. It's time to go back to breaking the game. Back when I was getting refinements for my GFs, I also learnt two other abilities, Card and Card Mod. Card is a very useful command. It allows you to turn most enemies into a card once they've taken enough damage. Not only does this give you a card, but it's also a way to end a battle without earning XP for your characters, but you still win items and AP for your GFs. This is very handy as it prevents over leveling. And what do we use these cards for? Why, we play triple triad. After FF7 most people agreed that having minigames was a good thing, but rather than have a load of different ones or a place like Gold Saucer to do them in, FF8 has Triple Triad, a card game with lots of different rules that you can play with quite a lot of the game's NPCs. Simply hit square and if they play, you can challenge them. The game works as follows. You select 6 cards to play with from your deck. In the top left corner there's 4 numbers, these are the card's values on each side. Say my opponent plays this card, you see that the value on the right is pretty low? Well, if I play this card next to it on that side, then I've won that card. Whoever's won the most cards once the 3x3 grid is filled wins the game, and they get to take cards out of their hand. They could take one card, they could take a random one, or they could take the whole hand depending on how the game's being played. Triple Triad is a pretty freaking cool minigame, something that you can constantly get into, if even just to chill for a bit. But of course it can be used to smash the game to a ridiculous degree. At the start of the game you get a few crap cards from this guy, assuming you talk to him. Traditionally from here you should play games, lose some, win some, gradually build a better deck. But sod that, we can go around a little, say back to the fire cavern, and get some better ones by using the card command against bombs. Doing this a few times should give us something we can work with. And then, well yeah, just play. Go around the Balaam Garden and play a lot. Specifically though, you want to play against this guy, or this guy, or this guy. Get the rare cards, get 5 Abyss Worms ideally, 15 if you're really going for a full beast party, although that can take a while. Once you've built an okay deck though, 5 Abyss Worms takes about an hour of Triple Triad, which isn't a lot in the world of grinding. What can you do with 5 Abyss Worms? Well, the card mod ability that we also learned works like a refinement, only with cards. Now they can be changed into items too. One Abyss Worm card refines into 1 Windmill then refines into 20 Tornadoes. Tornado at this stage of the game is ludicrous. Junction 100 of those onto Squall's strength? You're basically good until disc 3. You're a juggernaut. It's even worse due to how Squall works in battle and how limits work. You see, Squall is special. When you attack, if you press R1 right when he's about to strike, you will always do a critical hit. They aren't as powerful as other characters' luck-based criticals, but still, if you learn the timing, it's a critical every time. Also, his hit ratio is 255%, meaning that he never misses an attack, ever. This stat has logical reasons to be so high, as it's due to Squall's proficiency with his gunblade. Fellow gunblade wielder Cypher shares this outrageous stat. And then there's limits. Back in FF7, limit bars gradually raised as you took damage. Here, if you have low HP and the crisis level, as it's called, is high, then the limit option will pretty much always be open. Squall always does a multi-hit limit break, Lorenza Kuchen, where R1 button pressers also apply, and occasionally does a finishing move to go along with it. At this stage of the game and for a long time after, well, this is vicious against almost anything. It's about 5000 HP worth of damage. Only this T-Rexor can stand up to that. And if you're worried about keeping Squall on such low HP, well don't. Because during the first seed exam I got my 4th GF, Siren. After doing the usual learning of refinements with her, I was able to take 30 tents and refine them into 300 Kuragas. This is what 100 Kuragas does when junctioned to Squall's HP. You see? You can keep Squall at around 600 to 700 HP, more than enough right now, and he'll be able to murder basically anything at a moment's notice for a long time. This game. Holy hell is it broken. What was all that about Squall being a whiny emo again? This guy'll fuck your ass up harder than the Wu-Tang Clan. And still, I'm only scratching the surface. With cards and refinements there are so many ways of going about this. That became clear as I was researching the game. You could go further. Like, you could craft most of your party's ultimate weapons by the end of Disc 1. That's not a joke. With that in place, Squall can do high 5-figure damage by the end of the first disc. Quizdisc can learn a limit spell that outright kills most enemies in the game instantly. In fact, I did that one because I had most of the cards I needed to mod for the items you need just through playing. Hell, if you don't want to bother with grinding Abyss Worm cards for Tornado, you could always win Quistis's card from one of her groupies, then you can mod that into 3 Samantha Souls and refine lows into triples, which have basically the same effect. If you're worried about losing rare cards, don't, because you will get the opportunity to get them back later on. There are so many possibilities, and I couldn't possibly go through them all. A lot of people who love FF8 do so for these reasons. All of this is open to you right from the off. There's no mundane grinding for levels, the fun stuff like Triple Triad, if you enjoy it, is there immediately, and you can get straight on with breaking the game and creating a beast. And I do actually dig that. I like breaking RPGs, I like overkills, I like going back to early game trash mobs and using Knights of the Round on them, and so I like the way FF8 plays. FF8's system is actually quite remarkable to me, allowing so much variation and cute little ways to smash the game that, in the grand scheme of things, don't require a ludicrous hundreds of hours commitment to do, and you can do it right from the beginning. As it is, I'm going to chill on game breaking for now, as much as I dig it. We are going to be good for a long time, meaning that we can fully concentrate on story. And so, we are now Seed. Based on our performance in the exam, we now have a Seed rank too. This can vary wildly depending on how you did. If you talked to other people too much or evaded too many battles, you get points knocked off. Being Seed also means you start earning money. You no longer earn gil in battles. Instead, you're paid a wage as a Seed member. Being a part of Seed is another reason to not shy away from fights. Your level gradually goes down and it's only maintained through fighting monsters. Don't fight them and you lose rank, which loses you money. There are other ways you can lose rank by not maintaining the standards expected of a member. So far, I really like how gameplay and story intertwine in FF8. There is a solid logical base for just about everything so far. Considering how radically different FF8 is to most every RPG that came before it, I get the sense that the team really wanted the world to be consistent, without just casually explaining away the usual RPG cliches. And it works, because things are a lot more grounded here. I mean, Seed is a weird thing. Even if dystopia isn't as obvious here as it is in FF7, it says a lot about FF8's world when there are these military schools who have their own mercenary groups, trained from a young age, that get sent off to help the highest bidder for their services. We aren't loyal to Balaam or anything like that, we're loyal to money. They routinely send these teenagers off to pass exams in real-life combat situations, they keep monsters in the training centre who will kill you. Something's not spoken. What about all the people who don't make it? Where's all the bodies at? In Final Fantasy VII, Cloud started off as a grunt, but that was before the game got started. When you started, you had a cause, a moral imperative. In FF8, you don't even have that. In Final Fantasy VIII, being a grunt is your first aspiration. And now you're part of Seed, meaning that you are a grunt. It's not actually that special when you think about it. So our first mission takes Squall and company to a place called Timber. On the way there, however, the party seemingly get a dose of knockout gas and have this weird dream where they're Galbadian soldiers. Squall suddenly takes the role of Laguna Loire, a hard-drinking bro-type soldier with his pals Kiros and Watts. He's somewhat more talkative, but no less awkward, as evidenced when he tries to approach a girl playing piano in a bar. Still, something about Laguna attracts this girl to him, and they end up in a hotel room together. Laguna is, well, he seems to be a bunch of things that Squall would like to be. He's more comfortable around people, he has that badass sort of image, and even though he is awkward, he can sure as hell talk a lot. He has less inhibitions. Still, Squall doesn't think that much of him, as evidenced by his classic line when he wakes up from the dream. I dreamt that I was a moron. Jeez, Squall's really got a touch for these cut-in one-liners. Anywho, for this mission we're being paid by a resistance force in Timber who are leading a charge against those damn Galbadians. We're getting the impression now that Galbadia is the driving force in this world. They're certainly the most militaristic one, what with their antics in Dollet and now this. They took Timber over a while back and apparently it wasn't pretty. The resistance, meanwhile, is led by that girl Squall danced with at the graduation. Turns out her name's Rinoa. Squall finally has a name to the face. They're both here now, and this is after all their story. Another subtle FF8 touch, by the way, is that unlike most FF games, Squall and Rinoa are the only two characters you get the chance to rename. Everyone else, Zell, Selphie, Quistis and company, stay that way. So you could give one of them your name and the other one someone who's close to you, if you're feeling very corny. You can also give names to your guardian forces, which emphasises somewhat that they are sort of your pets, and they tend to prefer being used by one of you over everybody else. Anyway, the plan of the Resistance is to take their train and use it to kidnap Vinza Dealin, the president of Galbadia, by replacing his exclusive cart with a fake one. And so it's minigame time. You have to use codes to uncouple the cart without thwarting the guards below to your presence. A typical FF thing that does break the game up and stops it from just being go here and kill some monsters. Seed themselves are somewhat nonplussed about the whole thing, as the Resistance appears to be sort of incompetent. Remember, Squall and company are mercenaries, they don't have beliefs, or they're not paid to have beliefs. The plan itself works out fine, but the Resistance didn't count on the Galbadians using a body double, who turns out to be this really creepy undead monster who's probably the hardest enemy you've faced so far. I should note that the first time I played the game, this battle stopped me dead, especially because I hadn't actually saved in hours. Everything from here on out is brand new to me. Of course, we don't have much trouble this time round, but I should have remembered that because the monster is undead, I could have just chucked a Phoenix Down in his direction. Phoenix Downs resurrect people usually, but for undead monsters the reverse is true. They instantly kill them. It turns out that the president is on his way to Timber so that he can make a television broadcast. This is actually a big deal, as there hasn't been a broadcast via radio waves for 17 years. Everything in FF8's world is online. This was why Galbadia wanted to get that comms tower online back in Dolet. The Resistance crouch down and try to think up a plan to thwart this in minutes, much to Seed's displeasure. They all think they're very unprofessional. And it gets worse. They see the contract that Sid wrote up for them, which gives the Resistance full control over the squad until Timber is independent. What the hell's going on? Thinking back, it seems that the Garden faculty weren't too pleased about the mission you were going on. And holy hell, if you didn't think that you were a grunt before, you sure are now. It doesn't help that the relationship between Squall and Rinoa is awkward as hell. When you meet, it's clear that Rinoa was actually expecting Cypher. The dance didn't go that well after all. She's surprised and somewhat disappointed to learn that Cypher, who she met afterwards and who was able to introduce her to Sid personally, is not actually a Seed. Back in Timber, our plan is to bust the TV station and at least try to get some sort of message out. The G army's all over the place and the trains aren't running, but as we've seen, the army's not exactly a problem for Seed. The Resistance have a weird characterisation. They are somewhat capable, but Rinoa aside, they do act as incompetent comic relief. It is a little confusing, but I guess that reflects Seed's opinion of them. Anyway, we find our way there. It does seem weird that we struggle to actually find the station when it's clearly the biggest thing in the town, but there you are. There is another weird touch. The radio signal hasn't been off as such, but seems to have been broadcasting all these weird messages for a long time, like some monsters trapped in there. Anyway, the president's already there, and as the plan changes again, Rinoa and Squall finally have a right go at each other. Squall's pissed at the Resistance's incompetence, Rinoa's annoyed at Seed's passivity. It's been building and this is literally their first mission together. Rinoa might come across as a bit spoiled here. Why is she mad at Seed when they've been brought here to help with this silly Resistance? But her reaction is kind of understandable. Seed have been brought along to help, and they're not exactly helping much because Squall is so passive that he doesn't deign to make any suggestions as to the plan. Rinoa is frustrated because these guys are clearly looking to her for orders, despite openly being at best ambivalent about anything she says, and also openly being a hell of a lot more trained and supposedly combat ready than she is. You'd probably be pissed off with Squall too in this situation. There's a whole bunch more to say here, but I'll keep it for now. As it is, the broadcast's starting. First we get the signal going and... holy shit! What are you doing here, Trump? How the hell did FF8 call him as a president in 1999? I mean, just... what? Okay, I'm just playing. This guy's just the announcer, and any visual similarities to Trump are purely coincidental. But you do have to admit he looks a lot like him. This is the real guy, President Vinza Dealin. If anyone, he looks a bit like Bush Sr. He says that Galbadia is the only nation that can bring peace to the world. But there's a few matters that have to be solved with other nations first. Fortunately, he has an ambassador who'll be doing the rounds and sorting out these trifling affairs, which largely consist of "you're not under control of Galbadia" and we're going to make you be under control of Galbadia. Dealin just about manages to say that said ambassador is a sorceress before suddenly the broadcast is interrupted by Cypher. He's presumably bashed through everyone else to get here, and his gunblade is now at Dealin's throat. Christis is there too, trying unsuccessfully to control Cypher's savagery, and now we get to go there too. And when we get there, things get worse quickly. Everyone's shouting, Christis says that Cypher broke out of the disciplinary room, aka the brig, and Zell, being an idiot, manages to spurt out that they're all members of Seed and belong to Garden. Good going, dude. And then finally, the sorceress makes her appearance. She plays on Cypher's mental weak point by calling him a boy. If you consider the way that he's carried himself, you know that's the last thing Cypher wants to be. But seemingly she assumes control, makes him let go of the prez, and takes him off through the wall. So, yeah, things have not gone well. In the aftermath, there's little to do except find our way out. At a friendly house, the team contemplate just how badly things have gone wrong. Selphie wants to go home, Zell knows just how badly he's screwed up, Christis has failed to control a student again, Rinoa, who actually has by far the friendliest disposition towards Cypher, is worried about him, and Squall is utterly oblivious, saying that he's most likely dead. Logically, seeing as he was captured in an attempt to most likely kill the president, this is true, but saying it kind of makes you totally suck as a leader. Rinoa hates this, argues with Squall again, and calls him a meanie. Yeah, a meanie. Look, we'll break all this down shortly. Finally, we're allowed to move on. Needless to say, Balam Garden isn't somewhere we can go right now, as thanks to Zell it could potentially be directly in Galbadia's line of fire, so instead we opt to go to the nearest garden. Right here in Galbadia. This could be thought of as dangerous, but gardens are considered neutral zones in this world, and thus one of them is probably the safest place to be right now. And so that's where we're going. Right, I think it's time for a summary of our characters and the general state of things. In short, everything and everyone is fucked. For some, the introduction of Rinoa is where things start to go off the rails. If anything, she's less popular than Squall as a character. So far I'm not quite feeling that, but we're still in Disc 1, so we'll see. But what's the impression that you have so far? Basically, everyone in this game is utterly useless and incompetent. That's the one I have. Our Seed team are rubbish. They worked well in the controlled conditions of the field exam, but here? Well, they botched everything, people are dead, someone else got captured, they revealed where they were from, and have potentially caused an international incident. Aside from that, it went great. And Squall? Well, he's not a leader. He has no idea what to say to people, or how to direct them. His passivity caused a lot of this, just as much as Zell's hot-headedness caused him to say the one thing. Cypher is, if anything, even more of a hothead than Zell, and Christis couldn't do much to control that. Our headmaster Sid didn't even bother to explain what they were doing. To be honest, Selphie comes out of things the best, if only because she's so laid back, but even so, it's not like she could change things much either. What's stressed is that this whole thing isn't something you were basically powerless to stop, as is the case with similar situations in FF7. If Seed had done better, they could have stopped it. But they didn't, and it's their fault. And the Resistance? Well, as much as Seed clash with them for being amateurs, because they're so much better obviously, crouching down and trying to set plans in minutes and all that, at least they tried. Still, their main plan to capture the president was a duffer. It's purposefully very logical and thought through, but the point of it in writing, and how it works out, is that they can't see the forest for the trees, and because of that they were very easily fooled. It would have been better to concoct a riskier yet simpler plan, especially with Seed in tow. Selphie's blow shit up with a rocket launcher suggestion may be kind of nuts, but something along those lines would have probably done the job. We're grunts, and we're good at doing grunt things like leaving soldiers cold with gunblades, nunchakus and fists. As established, we are very bad at this thought-out strategical type nonsense. And then there's Rinoa. Oh boy. Again, not a popular character. If Squall is mopey and whiny, he's not so much that as utterly childish in his own way, Rinoa comes across as very immature and spoilt. Words like meanie don't help, God only knows what the writers were going for there. Surely jerk or even asshole would have been better. Hell, that one word is probably a big part of the reasons why people don't like Rinoa. It makes her sound 11 years old. She does serve a function right now though. she's the only person who stands up to Squall's coldness. As mentioned previously, Squall is a total arsehole right now, and that's not changed. Funnily enough, her ability to actually think and act quickly, something that everyone else just lacks, may well have helped in the TV studio when chaos reigned, but she wasn't there. Why? Well, because of the argument that she had with Squall. The whole thing really is an omni-shambles, isn't it? Good grief. From bean to cup, we fucked up. Before we leave Timberlow, I wish to point out a couple of things. First, for all of Squall's coldness, Selphie manages to get in quite possibly the, for lack of a better word, cuntiest line in the whole game right here when talking about the lady who is risking her house to hide you from Galbadian troops. I mean, holy shit! Talk about the unexpected savage. Why are we all such complete arseholes? And Selphie's the good one. She's probably the only actually likeable character in the whole game at present, aside from the flashback people. I stress again that I believe this dislikability to be intentional, but damn. One other funny thing that happens is if you go into this old guy's house. Now you may have noticed another thing different about FF8. You don't really go into people's houses and root around for treasure chests. The game conditions you away from them. They aren't in dungeons, so they're not likely to be in towns either. There's a cupboard in this house that throws a lampshade on the whole thing. First time you try and open the cupboard, you're chided for it. The man wonders what young folks are doing these days, going around and opening cupboards. 2 more times and you gradually get more hints, including one that points to something definitely being in there. On the 4th time you look closer, and all of a sudden, boom, you found it. 500 gil. It's the family's savings and you've just taken them. My god, we are so heroic. So heroic. That said, I kind of wish that treasure chests hadn't been dropped. If only because it gives you more impetus to check every house for them, and while you're there, you may as well hear the NPC stories, which often provide the character moments and details that you need to have a chance of grasping this game's plot. So far there's only 3 people who've shown all that much in the way of heroism or competence in the whole game, and they exist in a dream world. We kinda wish we was rolling with them right now. Don't fret though, after Renault and Squall get into their 10th fight of the day while walking through a forest en route to Galbadia Garden because Squall is once again being a complete arsehole Mr. Logic to Zell who's worried about Balaam, the hoodoo strikes again, causing Squall, Selphie and Quistis to feel asleep. And so we're back with Laguna, Kiros and good old Watts. This time they're on a mission in an excavation site for a lost civilization, a detail that weirdly you only find in menus. Like I said, you kinda need to look around a lot and talk to NPCs all the time. There's tons of world details and character details to find that gradually make the whole thing more sensical. If you don't, then you may end up feeling a bit lost. Laguna is kind of odd on this mission. He seems less sure of himself and prone to various mishaps, like dropping old keys out of his pocket, or obsessing over hatches, or getting more cramp in his legs. It's like he's going soft, and the interactions are very well written. Again, it's worth going around every nook and cranny because otherwise you might miss these little character interactions completely. And the other good thing about that is that you fight more enemies, which means you get to hear the man with the machine gun more, which is one of the best songs in the entire freaking game. Finally though, we get ambushed on the edge of a cliff. Even though we smash these guys, one of them gives Kiros and Watts a big critical hit before dying. Yay for narrative battles, I suppose? It is a little annoying. It kinda makes sense if you think of our squad as still part of the nondescript G-Army group that we routinely beat the piss out of, but then their stats are the same as ours, so it doesn't really come off that way. On the cliffside, Kiros and Watts appear to be close to death, but Laguna, who seems to have gone a little bit hat-stand, sees a boat that will take them back to Galbadia. Heroically, he throws Kiros and Watts over the cliff's edge and into the water, before unheroically hesitating to go down himself, slipping and bonking his head on the way down. And so the flashback ends with our daring Galbadian heroes in more than a little bit of peril. We're back in the room and we're going to Galbadia Garden. Fortunately, it's right next to the forest. Galbadia's garden feels somewhat different to Balaam, although the makeup is similar, less populated perhaps, and also maybe a little hostile. Presumably word gets around about Seed's exploits in gardens across the world, and the fact that we royally screwed the pooch on our last mission is probably not going to endear us to the other folks in Garden. One thing to note also is that Quistis and Selphie, like Kiros and Watts, are down to 1 HP and in desperate need of healing. That's important. It's a statement in gameplay that the dreams our group are having are closer to reality than they might appear. It's also a hint that while our parallel heroes might be down, they're not out. Christis, the only other person who's been here before, gets an audience with the headmaster and relays the results back to us. Firstly, we're okay here, and secondly, Balaam Garden is okay. What happened in Timber is being treated as an independent action. In other words, Cypher has been thrown under the bus. More than that, the trial has already happened and the sentence has been carried out. So yeah, Cypher, as far as our group know, has been executed. Again, the dynamics are odd. All the Garden people in the room have little but negative memories of the guy. Zell hated him but is pretty shocked at his death. Selphie never really knew him, Christis thought he was troubled and has no good memories of him, and Squall is kinda complex but deep in his own thoughts about it. Rinoa is the only one who has positive memories, including, as is revealed, a love affair last summer. There's also the unsaid thought. Did Cypher do that for Rinoa? Probably not. As evidenced by what Christis says, he was mainly doing it for him because he didn't trust these damn rookies to do the job properly. The body language here is fantastic, by the way, as it is through most of the game. A lot of folks worried about FF8's switch from the cartoony models we were used to actual, properly proportioned people, but it definitely worked for the best here. Seriously, people's reactions make a lot of the scenes more than the text does. Squall is very troubled at how people are talking about Cypher. Suddenly he's in the past, he's a memory. This is not something that he's had to deal with, really. This whole scene where Squall kinda has an outburst is seen as another whiny emo me moment for him, but really it's because Squall is so used to shying away from problems until they just go away, whether it's Christis pouring her heart out to him or Rinoa calling out his coldness. Cypher being dead is not a problem that's going to go away, and Squall doesn't like it. Remember how immature and childish he actually is. The whole thing's another reminder of how stunted these folks are emotionally. Meanwhile, Squall runs into two people I've not touched on, Fujin and Raijin, who we've seen before. They're Cypher's lackeys and they're passing on a message from Balaam, new orders. They also ask about Cypher, and Squall gives them the bad news. They don't believe it, mind you, and quickly announce that they're off to Galbadia to go look for Cypher. This could be seen as people processing grief in their own ways, but, well, let's review. Cypher is a highly capable soldier who clearly ripped through the entire President's Guard to get a blade at his throat, this after breaking out of the Brigade Garden in the first place, and the last time we saw him was when he went through a wall into an unknown place under control of a sorceress whom we know little about. He is also a total hothead who will break skulls and scorch the frickin' earth at a moment's notice. Are we actually supposed to believe that Cypher, being who he is, would have submitted to an execution just like that? Like, even if you're not bothering with due process or anything for a trial, and it's safe to say that Galbadia wouldn't bother, it's all a bit too fast and convenient, isn't it? Anyway, our new orders are communicated to us by Galbadia's headmaster, Martine. The introduction of this sorceress is very worrying indeed. It hardly needs to be said that Dealin's talk of bringing peace to the world was total bullshit, and that he actually wishes to bring the entire world to heel under Galbadia's rule. The sorceress is key to that, as she will intimidate the world's leaders into submission. You've already seen how effortlessly she got to Cypher after all. It should be noted that sorceresses have caused their fair share of problems in this world's past, and that Garden, despite being neutral, is not exempt from Lee's plans. And so Garden have taken the big step and given us the go-ahead to assassinate the sorceress. We will do so with the help of a sniper, who's going to be introduced to us right now. Meet Irvine Caneas. He apparently likes to get a rise out of people, he's a dick, and he decides to immediately make a party for himself with Selphie and Rinoa, a decision that I'm sure had nothing but strategy in mind. In this playthrough, Squall accepts Irvine's suggestion because he is, of course, an awful leader, and because the result is again more fun character moments. Christis' interaction with Squall here is probably one of the funniest moments in the whole game. For now though, well, we're off to Galbadia's capital, Dealin City. We've seen part of it in the Laguna flashbacks, but now we'll be seeing it for real. And yes, despite our tremendous failure in the last mission, we have now been entrusted with preventing the world from falling into Galbadia's hands. FF8's story gets a lot of shit, and I'm starting to get that more and more as we go. But for now, I do think that the story is more sensible and acceptable if you think of quite literally everyone as utterly incompetent for various reasons, and that it's exploring what makes these people so bad at their jobs and helping to make the world so terrible, whether it's immaturity, uncontrollable emotions, being corrupt, or just, well, being an idiot. So, on to dealing. It's a beautiful and very busy place, and there's a fair amount to see there. The design of the place is inspired by Paris, something that the big old gate should make obvious as it's based on the l'Arc de Triomphe. We have to meet up with a guy named General Caraway. Before we do though, a somewhat annoying guard tells us that we need to pass a test. This involves going to a place called the Tomb of the Unknown Kin and finding the ID of a lost, presumably dead student who went there. It serves as something to break up all the exposition and get a bit of gameplay in, but to be honest I want to see where the story goes, so I only do what's required of me. We'll go back there later. Anyway, we give the guy a code and we meet up with the general. Seeing as he's clearly a high-ranking figure in the Galbadian government, it's intriguing to know why he's in on this coup. What does he gain? That's interesting to me. But instead we get another revelation. This is actually Rinoa's house as well, meaning that General Caraway is Rinoa's dad. Rinoa ran off a while back to join with the Resistance, and they don't like each other. There's not much further elucidation on this, however. I'm not a big fan of this revelation, to be honest. Maybe because I was hoping that Rinoa had more of an interest in motivation for being a part of the Resistance. And in the end though, it all boils down to, "Fuck you, Dad!" This is not something that stands in Rinoa's favour as a character. Anyway, the plan is as follows. One team will act as a distraction, closing the gates on the sorceress's float as she passes under the arc just as the clock strikes 8, at which point the sniper team will rise up on the top of a clock and have a clear shot at her. We also find out that the sorcerer's name is Adia, something that seems to strike a little memory bone in Squall. Again, I can't help but thinking that the plan is very overwrought. All these little details and so on. So many things that can go wrong. So many. Caraway running about the road and pretending he's the parade doesn't exactly help either. Again, my mind wanders back to Selphie and her suggestion to just blow shit up. Is it really a good idea to basically tell a sorceress that you're about to try and kill her before you do it? Hey ho, we're Seed, and we're obviously not here to question our orders. Naturally, Irvine and Squall are going to make up the sniper team, and Quistis will lead Selphie and Zell in the Causeway team. But what of Rinoa? Well, she's not Seed. Caraway says that Rinoa should really not accompany the Seed on this mission, and while they're still taking orders from her, something that Squall reminds Caraway of in probably the most active moment we've seen from him so far, they're inclined to agree. As we're all moving out, Rinoa comes in with her plan. She's got this magical necklace, you see. If the sorceress can be convinced to put it on, it'll nullify her powers. We'll do this by, doing it somehow. Quistis has had enough of Rinoa's shit and utterly roasts her before leaving her behind to wallow. So the first step is getting everyone into position. The Causeway team are positioned at the gates, while Squall and Irvine head to the parade and keep an eye on things for now. There's a pretty interesting dialogue sequence between them here, as Irvine muses on what they do and whether they should just kill anyone and never question orders. It's another foreshadowing, basically. Irvine is a dick and not a likeable character in the slightest, but it is an interesting moment, and Squall never really answers him, choosing to mull it over in his head. As a leader, he probably should have given him an answer. Still, everyone's in position, and then this happens. Quistis suddenly decides that she feels bad for bollocking Rinoa just now. In fact, she feels so bad that, as leader of the team, she's going to go back to the house and apologise to her. Everyone says that we shouldn't leave their post, but, well, they follow her anyway. What do you think happens next? Back at the house, Caraway tries to explain to Rinoa but gets blown off. He decides to try and lock her in by setting off a security system, a timed lock that emits a loud beep until it sets. Being that Rinoa's obviously lived here too, she knows what that means, and so she escapes. Somehow Quistis and company miss her as they're passing each other and they head straight into the room, just as the door locks, trapping them. And the sound of that door shutting is also the sound of me suddenly losing a ton of enthusiasm that I had for this game. Look, I get what the storyline is trying to do. I get that these people are supposed to basically be incompetent teenagers, and that because of this they screw up easily. But this? I mean, it's just too much. Obviously the game's been building up to it, but holy hell, how stupid do you want to get? How much more do you need? I kinda got it already. Characters in games do stupid things now and again, and yeah, they shouldn't be perfect, they should be human. But Jesus Christ! This is one of the stupidest sequences I have ever seen in a video game, and this is kind of the point where it stops being fun. There's a great danger when you make a game like this that you reach that point, and you would rather people just got their shit together. And this is it. The warning signs were there, the father revelation, the second overwrought plan, but I do feel that this may be the point where Final Fantasy VIII as a story kinda falls apart. Anyway, we're now in control of Rinoa, who just has to climb some crates and stuff to get to the room that Adia's getting ready in. And what's her big plan? To approach Adia and say that she has a gift for her, hoping that she'll just put it on. Yep, the stupidity doesn't stop. We already pretty much know that Adia can read people's minds, so needless to say Rinoa doesn't get far. She's thrown back, knocked out, and possessed. Adia goes off to do her speech with a dazed Rinoa and President Dealin by her side. Immediately she goes off script, chiding the crowd for cheering the thing that they used to hate, sorceresses who were once responsible for the world's troubles. But all that's changed now, and Adia is going to rule the world. A concerned Dealin tries to get his ambassador back on track, and Adia's response is to give him the old T-1000 treatment. Dunked on. President Dealin ends up suffering the same fate as President Shinra. Thought he was going to be your main enemy? Nah, the actual one just killed him. A nice touch here is that all the while, the crowd cheers, even as Adia scolds them. There's a slight implication that Adia already has Lem under her spells too. In the crowd, Squall and Irvine can't help noticing that Rinoa's swaying around by her side as Adia finishes her speech, calls for a sacrifice, and sets a couple of beasts after her. Irvine tries to get Squall to move now, but Squall knows that they will have a better chance when the parade starts in a minute. It seems to be another frustrating moment, but I do actually think that it's one of the first signs of a bit of character improvement for the guy. Rinoa does need to be saved, but we need the opportunity. Squall is slowly becoming better at leadership. Back with the stupid idiots. They have to find a way out of this room, and do so by solving a simple puzzle. This opens a secret door that leads to the sewers. But enough of them, the parade's starting, and the sniper team finally has their chance. As they rush past the parade, we see that someone else is close to Adia's side. It's Cypher. As we suspected, he isn't dead at all. He's just under Adia's control, and loving it. No time to break this down now. Squall and Irvine take the same path that Rinoa took. Obviously the thing to do is to take the hatch into the clock tower, but first there's the small matter of saving Rinoa, who's now come around. The monsters in question get beaten easily, although annoyingly I missed the Guardian Force that you can draw from them. But now that Rinoa's safe, we can carry on with our part of the mission. There's a bit more good dialogue. Squall explains to Rinoa that Cypher is alive, but that he's with Adia, and says that at some point he may well have to kill him. But this isn't something he's actually happy about. It's also at this point where Squall and Rinoa actually do start to warm up a little towards each other. Irvine meanwhile is kind of worrying about his job. We leave them just as he says to Squall that he can't do it. In the end, like all the rest of them, he may be good in training, he may be a crack shot when dealing with targets, but when it comes to killing people, he's just another bloody kid. The stupid idiots make their way through the sewers and finally get back to the gate, just in time. I haven't really stated, but this is an awful part of the game. Why this is in when all the action's going on, it just breaks things up completely. It's rubbish. As the clock strikes 8 and Adia's float goes through the gates though, they do manage to close them. The clock tower rises up, and again, we have a good moment for Squall. Irvine still worries about taking the shot, the implication of what it means to kill someone who is now, for all intents and purposes, a head of state. And Squall, for a change, actually motivates him. He takes on the leader role, encouraging him and saying that he can do it, even if he misses. At last Irvine lines up the shot, takes a breath, and fires. For all his worries, his aim is true. The bullet's headed right for the space between Adia's eyes. However, this plan was shit from the beginning. Adia's obviously aware that something's going on, having gates shut on you will do that, and blocks the bullet. However, it distracts the crowd and gives Squall the opportunity to rush down there and get closer. First he confronts Cypher, who seems to relish his new role. He thinks of himself as a knight, an honourable person that is protecting his princess, Adia. This again is a consistent theme throughout the disc. Cypher is a distortion of a good guy. Taking the knight role is how he sees himself. whereas Squall is a mercenary, a role that usually has negative connotations. Despite all the stupidity happening, this is a good plot point and a role switch. As it is, the duel between Squall and Cypher doesn't last long. 2 hits. We are still kind of overpowered. After that, the party faces Adia. If I'd drawn that GF, I'd have a more amusing way to beat her that involves breaking her AI, but while her high magic can smash the party a little, it doesn't do much to Squall. We do win eventually, or at least she stops the battle. She's not beaten, she just powers up some icicles and sends them flying in our direction. One of them goes right through Squall's chest and he collapses as Rinoa watches in horror. End of FMV, end of the whole botched up plan to kill a sorceress, and at last, the end of Disc 1. Whew, my word, that was a lot to get through. So, where are we at with the game right now? For the most part, I enjoyed playing Disc 1 a lot. There's a lot of fun stuff to do with the gameplay and I really dig that side of the game. I dig a lot of the breaking of traditional RPG gameplay conventions that FF8 does, and I dig the lengths that it goes to reflect that in story as well as gameplay. I dig some of the neat twists and characterizations, and I think that it's a freaking beautiful game. Seriously, the cities, the models, all the little animations, they're wonderful. And I do get what they tried to do with the plot. But at the end of the disc, the whole stupid teenagers angle did become frustrating, and I fear for the game if it continues on that way. Looking back through this script, I see what's kinda happened. As I was concentrating on gameplay, I was loving it, and when we moved on to story full on, well, gradually things started to fall apart. And most people, that is pretty much everyone, generally consider Disc 1 to be the game's high point. There's still 3 more to go. We shall see what lies ahead, I suppose. But for now, this video has already gone on way too long, and we will have to end it here. I didn't originally set out to do a multi-part series on Final Fantasy VIII, but now, well, it turns out that I have quite a lot to say. Bye for now. Thanks for watching this video, the first part of Final Fantasy VIII. There's still a long way to go. If you like this video, then please do like it. You could also subscribe to the channel, check me on my Facebook or my Twitter, or indeed my Patreon if you'd like to see things like Google Hangouts or Skype chats or review requests and all that good shit. Now for this video, I would like to thank the following: Adam Schaefer, Andrew Dalton, Andy Capt, Oddie Sawley, Chris Wilkins, Conformist, Dustin Cooper, Gary Pinkett, George Newton, Guafan Blackpool, Ian Roberts, James Idd, James Loveridge, Jason Goy, Jason Leach, Jason Stevens, Johan Eriksson, John Scott, Keith Barlow, Carl F, L. O'Brien, Lee Norris, ManagerSim.net, Mark Heslop, Mark Johnston, Mark Whittington, Martin Pataki, Nanette McCrone, Olaf Albeen, Pete Morris, Filter Prog, Piotr Margel, Rachel Maxwell, Romeo, Sean Zoltek, Seth Robinson, Simon Gulliver, Taylor Armand, The Unnatural, Tanyo J, Twisted Scroat, and Vishar D.